So, welcome everyone back to Webinar Wednesday in this Wednesday in the middle of October as we look forward to the winter months and whatever that brings and the changes and all that sort of stuff and yeah.
Yes, it's a look forward and a look back, isn't it?
It is. It's not as dark today, though, Alistair. It's not as dark as it was yet. Yesterday was a very dark. It felt like a very dark day, an overcast day, didn't it? And
it was a bit grim. We actually had the Learning Disability Group meeting we had the AGM last night.
Yeah, what was that? The AGM of the Learning Disability Group of Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire.
Yes, and we actually had folk joining from Feel Good Friday as well.
Oh, right, okay.
In Centreville, which was quite good. But at one point, the rain was so hard, it was the hardest I've ever literally heard it. And because I'm in the log cabin, it fairly rattled. And I had to have my volume up at 90, which I've never had before on my laptop, just so I could hear what was being said. It was just anyway. But yeah, no, it's much more autumnal rather than midwinter today.
It is, yeah. So that's interesting. So that was the AGM online then for that group.
It was our very first online AGM, and again it was one of those ones where it highlighted once again just how tricky it is for some people. On the one hand, it was great. We had folk from the Central Belt joining us who wouldn't normally have been able to log in and just to get their perspective on how that affects their lives, but also for some people who still, despite over a month of prep, still couldn't quite get the support together to get online. Issues about things like, the laptop's a team laptop and we don't know if we can leave it for the person to get access to it after staff go off. And it was like, if we'd have known this was the issue, we could have come up with another solution. We've actually got another tablet that we could have deployed if the issue was about sensitive material. And I guess that's something else that we've looked into as well, is that kind of getting hold of stuff to make sure that people have the physical ability to engage with some of these online things.
Yeah, the whole thing about digital exclusion, isn't it? And just sometimes it's really like anything, isn't it? Really, if your experience is you get more used to doing things all the time online, it's so easy not to realize that lots of other people still can't access the things in the same way for a whole range of reasons. One of which you described there, and there's all sorts of other things, isn't there? All sorts of other practical things that are getting
confidence is huge as well. We did spend the first 5 minutes in the comedy kind of, is my camera on? It was on for a second, now it's off again. And I think you've just got to accept it, that while it's not, while people get used to it, there'll be a bit of that, and that's okay, and you need to feel okay with that, and I think if people are struggling because they like to know that they've, this is how they run meetings and they don't want to feel out of control. It's a bit of getting used to that kind of foray into the unknown, isn't it?
It is. So I will just say that just in case, because I didn't say it's the start, our guest today is Gail Carstairs from Enable Services in Fife, who are funded to provide information, advice and support for people in Fife. Gail's going to join us at 11:15.
Yes.
Today, as our guests normally do, so that's good. And I'll just go back to the AGM because we've just been looking at the date for the In Control Scotland AGM this year. Because obviously we're going to do it online. It's going to be at the end of November sometime. So we hopefully will have that fixed in the relatively near future. Or anyway, fairly soon. We'll have it fixed fairly soon. And we'll let people know because it's going to be an open AGM online so that anyone who wants to join us can join. It won't be onerous. It's not going to be particularly long AGM this year, but we're going to create a little bit of space for people to discuss some things about looking forward in these current constrained, restricted, and whatever times.
Yes.
and in Control Scotland activity, as well, obviously, as talking about some of the things that we've done over the last year, as you normally would at an AGM. We're not even sure whether we're going to have our finances independently audited by then, just because of delays in getting that done. So it may be that we have our finances ready for last year, and it may not by then. So we'll see. Yep.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? Just so much is just thrown into a little bit of, we've just got to rearrange everything and try and make it fit as best we can.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Make the most sense of it. So what have you been up to?
So far it feels like, I've almost just been up to catching up with things because I was off last week.
Yeah, I was going to say, sometimes when you come back, it feels like, I think one of the best phrases I ever heard was being force-fed information through a fire hose. You know, when you turn on your computer or you answer the phone, and you just get a deluge of stuff, and you just got to try and make sense of it.
Yeah. So maybe it probably more feels just like trying to follow up some of the things that came. I mean, there wasn't tons and tons of things either. It wasn't even like I was just like following up and phoning up a couple of people who emailed about something, or following up about arranging another meeting for the future. So that's really what I've been doing over the last couple of days. I spent some time went into the office yesterday to do a couple of things because it was easier to do them in there, which isn't something that I've done much of recently. So went to the offices at Neighbourhood Networks, and at socially distanced, there was me and Adrian, who's the deputy in Neighbourhood Networks, in there. So yeah.
So it's still a couple of folk at a time, pretty much in the office.
Yep. Well, how about you?
How about me? Well, I've been in my office as usual. I guess there's not much changed in terms of that. So yeah, it's just been like I say, lots of stuff following up about the rights and equalities bits and bobs. Try to work out what we're going to do next with that, and sharing a few ideas about that. Coming up for review and time for thinking about what we've done over the last 6 months there, and. So we've got good morning from SDS Options Fife. Good morning. And so obviously, yes. And just before we were kicking off today, I was sharing an idea of a thing that I saw on Facebook, which I just thought, blimey, it just makes you lose your faith in the fact that we're actually making progress. It's not from the UK; it's from America. But this is a story that Texas has just ruled that social workers in Texas can now legally discriminate against taking clients on the basis of sexuality, disability, or gender identity. And I just thought, I just think, in conjunction with that whole thing about, how a lot of the stories of how folk have been treated in Britain with PIP and things like that, about the lack of acknowledgement of folks' humanity and individuality. There seems to be far too many stories of things going backwards, rather than forwards. How could folk sit down and say, how a National Association of Social Workers, have said this change is incredibly disheartening. But how could that possibly, in modern society, how could that possibly get passed? How could a group of people sit down and say, we'll let people not support and serve the actual folk that are going to need them? Anyway, it's a bit of a random one. It's not very local, but it worried me.
What does it make you think, Alistair? It makes you think about. I suppose what it makes me think is that although we sometimes think things are moving forward and we can see positive change, that there's always a danger. There are always dangers to that, and that change never is entirely positive, is it? Change is inevitable.
Yes.
But of itself, something you always feel like you're going one step forward and one step backwards sometimes. Well, not always, but sometimes you do. So yeah.
But it's just anyway, it's on Daily Costs on their Facebook page. So I mean I think it's one of these ones that it would be good to kind of maybe connect to some of our connections in the States and say, you know, how can we avoid the spread of this type of stuff? Because it seems like silence. You know, if this sort of stuff is allowed to happen, you just wonder what's next. You know, sort of like the eugenic stuff, and it just makes my skin crawl. Anyway, it's just it just makes you worry. Anyway, it's not very enlightening start to the discussion, but I thought it's worth a little bit of discussion because
the thing I was looking at earlier today was the information on the review of adult social care in Scotland, which hopefully is a positive development, and that's something that's part of this year's programme for government but the Scottish government have issued. So there's a review which will come up with recommendations, which is going on at the moment, that hopefully people will have heard of. And the intention is that there will be recommendations and a report compiled from that group by January 20, whenever that is. When's that? What is it next year? 21?
21.
By January 21, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So absolutely. I've just noticed we've had a quite a detailed one here from Lisa, who's a former Partners graduate.
Yeah.
And she's saying clear communication to people that needs simplified are still not happening. Like you say, things are going backwards or offering people understanding concept. Still from mild learning needs and disabilities, it's still extreme effort to get communication when you try and apply for whatever you're applying for. So that's that, or get hold of a social worker. So that's that whole idea of having to prove entitlement and that how to engage with people right at the start. How do you even get a conversation? And that's really super important. So it's something we could maybe think about discussing once Gail joins as well, about the challenges of some of that stuff. And June's also shared details about the adult social care review there.
And the aim of that review is to recommend improvements with that being done by January. So there's an opportunity to influence what's being said. I suppose really why I'm raising it today is just really being aware of the opportunity to influence that and to get people's lived and personal experiences into that review of adult social care. There's going to be a discussion about it at the SDS Collective later on today as well.
Yes. I mean, I guess I'm just trying to think about any other ways that we can support that as well. We could maybe have one of our Feel Good Fridays talking about it.
I think that would be good. And I think, I mean, to be honest, Alistair, I think my intention would be that we will set up some sort of online meeting to gather people's views on that. But that's what I'm thinking about this. That it would be good to do that and maybe invite someone. So the idea would be we'll invite someone from the review along, and then try and gather together some people's views. Anyone really who wants to is connected with us. So. So
we've just been made aware of. There's another couple of the Support My Choice DSS and the Alliance. So we're getting a lot of good interaction today. I like it, and we'll also hello from Gillian. Hello, Gillian. Any questions? Anything you want to say? Please feel free to join in. And
the other thing I was aware of this week has been the publicity around carers and the issues that carers have been facing, either with removal or reduction or changes to support, whatever the impact, whatever's happened, but in each individual circumstance. But but there's been quite a lot of publicity. It's been on national news there, and been on local, been on Scotland news as well, about the difficulties that the pandemic and all the restrictions, and then those things that we mentioned there, reductions in support, and the impact that's had on carers. And I know the Coalition of Carers produced their report that we talked about a few weeks ago, and I think that's been highlighted both here and across the UK. On the Scottish Human Rights Commission report, which reflected very similarly on that. So again, I think there's quite a lot of maybe a bit of impetus behind that at the moment about saying we need to address that, and we need to do some more things so that people are actually able to access more of the supports, or to develop the support that they get in a different way that works for them. Yeah.
No, that's important. Well, Gillian, she's been in the video. Well, Gillian, you know what? We're always looking for more people to come on to Webinar Wednesdays and talk about things. So if you've got anything you might want to come on and join us. Yeah. So he's got since our 5 and 7. So that's cool. Okay. And we've also had queries about the availability of flu jug for PAs. Oh, right. Okay. So we'll maybe get into this. We'll maybe we'll get Gail to join us now.
Yeah. No, I've actually had a conversation about that as well this week. In a couple of places. Actually, in a couple of places as a result of just really, as I was saying earlier on, following up some of the things that were in my emails. So yeah.
All right. Okay. Welcome to Gail. Hi, Gail.
Hi.
Hiya.
Hello.
We're into a flurry of questions here about flu drugs and that. But what we'll do is we'll take a step back and say hello to you. And do you want to just tell us a bit more about your role and what you've been up to?
We've been really busy since the beginning of the pandemic. What we are set up to do is really give people information around self-direct support. We quickly found out that people in Fife, where we cover the geographical area of Fife, that the criteria is so tight in Fife, so people are not getting access to an assessment, let alone any kind of budget. So we had to quickly look at how we then still support people and connect them to their local community. So over the pandemic, we've been really, really busy. There's 3 of us that cover the whole of Fife, and we've been really busy. We've had over 100 new referrals since the beginning of the lockdown, and there's been a lot more inquiries about self-directed support, as you can imagine. You know, people and carers. You know, you're just talking about carers, how they can use their budget differently for the people that they're caring for. And we've been supporting them to look at, you know, how this can happen, and to challenge social work around that as well, and to make sure that they're aware of guidance. We've been supporting carers to get PPE when they've not had access to it. We've been supporting people just trying various things, you know, to do with the pandemic, just letting them know we're still there, but we're supporting in a different way. We've been attending a lot of transition meetings for young people and things as well, and doing some person-centered planning with youngsters remotely, because we used to deliver big plans, but obviously we can't do that at the moment. So we've been doing a bit of person-centered planning with youngsters remotely to make sure that they're still getting their outcomes met. So it's been all go. It's been really busy.
And Gail, just introduce yourself as well. Just tell us about you, and also tell us how long the service has been going. So, because obviously you've been going for maybe 3 years now.
Since 2015.
Yeah.
So my name's Gail Carstairs, and I lead on the We Can All Do It project for Enable. We were set up in 2015, and then we got an extra 3 years funding, and we're now funded up until March 2021.
Okay.
So I started off as a project coordinator, and I'm now project lead.
Okay. And just in terms of all those, I mean, lots of things you've already said there about the things that you've been doing since lockdown, and you're probably doing most of them before, weren't you? Anyway, but just you have to do them differently now. Is that right?
Yeah, it's been a learning curve. You know, we're not great with technology, but we've had to push ourselves out our comfort zone and learn. So one of the things that we have been doing a wee bit differently is I supported a family just before the lockdown around getting an assessment carried out. And within 6 weeks, we had the assessment completed. I'd gone to panel, they had been allocated a budget. But things weren't moving forward, obviously, because of the lockdown. But we found ways of getting around using technology to advertise for PAs and interview online. And we've now got PAs in place. So that's been a big learning curve, you know, how we can use technology to our advantage. And I think that's something that everybody's had to learn.
It is, isn't it? See when you were saying there about making about helping make sure that people are aware of the guidance that's available. I mean, in terms of the guidance that's come from Scottish Government about the flexibility that people should have with their budgets and encouraging, you know, imaginative use of budgets. How do you feel that's being acted on? Do you feel that people have been really flexible, or is that not your experience, or has it been a mix?
It's not really been our experience. We've had to push that, you know, and try and, you know, have that conversation with social work around, you know, it's still about meeting that person's outcomes, but because services are not open at the moment, how can we look at that a wee bit differently and a wee bit creatively? So we've been supporting around, you know, working with the families and working with social work to be the go-between, you know, to have those conversations and build up those relationships around that as well. I was just speaking to a family this morning whose son was getting a local service, which is just closed down completely due to the pandemic. But we found out that social work should have had a conversation with them around outreach services with the same service that they could offer, and social work haven't been given that, haven't had that conversation with the family. So, you know, it's sad, you know, that, you know, there's you spoke earlier about carers, you know, and it's been really difficult for carers over this pandemic, you know, and we're still not out the other side of the pandemic. And carers are trying to do, you know, if they're working, they're trying to keep their family together, you know, and go out to work and finding those alternative ways of supporting the person that they care for. And it's been really, really difficult for carers, really difficult over the pandemic.
What I was going to say was that one of the things we've noticed is that quite often people are feeling like they have to come up with a solution still, and then, you know, get that approved rather than a proactive shift. I mean, this isn't the case everywhere. Some people have been really proactive, but for a lot of cases, there's some proactive, you know, a need for that learning from once somebody notices, oh well, that got stopped. Nobody actually said, what are we going to replace that with, and how do we proactively make that information available to folk, so folk are left with that anxiety, and then they've got to go and ask. How do we make sure that becomes, you know, part of the approach, so that nobody else has to do that same starting from scratch, so that folk are saying, you know, as soon as something gets withdrawn or that there's an idea of it, that flagged up about how could it be provided differently, what information is going to be provided, because otherwise it's really tiring what you're describing, and what we're hearing in a lot of places is that folk are going to go and make the ask from nothing again. Keith, will you come in with something there?
Yeah, well, I don't know what the answer is. I know that a lot of the carers that we've been working with, they've not even had any contact with social work over this period at all. You know, so they're really, really stuck as to, you know, how they can open that conversation. And I think that's where it's really good having that independent support, you know, because families are tired having those conversations all the time, and I know social work are just really stretched at the moment. You know, they're looking at people who are at risk and things, but when does something become a risk? And I think it is really difficult for carers, you know, to have yet another conversation around, you know, it's just really, you know, it's the sign of the times at the moment, you know, and I don't know what the answer is, you know, going forward, how we make those changes. And I think, to be fair to social work as well, some of them are not getting this information at the front line, you know, about the guidelines and things that's coming out from the Scottish Government as well, you know, and they don't know that they can use budgets in a different way. You know, so we've also had carers, you know, who have said that, you know, that their assessments have been put on hold and things as well, you know, that these are not getting carried out just now, you know, so we've also had conversations that just because there's a pandemic, we can't be putting things on the back burner. You know, parents and carers are still going, you know, are becoming even more in a crisis, so we need to look at how we can shift that, you know, and you know, still carry on with these assessments and the day-to-day work that needs to be done.
Yeah, I mean, what I was going to say really was again probably just reinforcing that and saying that that's the experience of people in lots of different places, that when things finish or have finished or have been withdrawn or the services stopped, there's nothing happened yet in its place, and people are struggling both with the immediate things and also looking into the future, thinking, well, what can... So I was talking to somebody yesterday whose son will be leaving school at the end of this next year. So he's thinking about that, but he's also thinking about, well, our current support's changed as well. So how can we work out a way for us to get something that will be good for our son just now, and will also sustain us a little bit. Yeah. So it seems to be that that's still a lot of people's experience, and maybe sometimes we obviously hear when things aren't working, and for some people things are working and there have been creative solutions, but there's still lots of people where that is their situation, and that's really what he's telling us from your experience too, Gail, isn't it?
Yeah, and you know, I think it's around communication. You know, it always seems to go back to communication, and I think there needs to be different conversations had, you know, around ways forward, you know. And I think one of the things that has come out from the pandemic is at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of community building. And I think we need to look at starting to build on that. We have conversations often, you know, when we make contact with social work on behalf of parents and carers. We often have the conversation that SDS is not just about a budget. You know, sometimes one of the first things we'll hear is there's no money, there's no resources, you know, they don't meet the criteria. But it's not about a budget, it's about the approach that as professionals everybody should be using now, you know, and focusing on what's the gifts here, you know, looking at everybody's got something to offer, you know, what are these gifts that people have there to offer? Don't let us focus on the deficits. You know, it's not about what's not working, it's about what is working at the moment and how we can build on that. You know, using that ABCD, you know, that asset-based community development stuff, making sure that everybody feels a part of their community, you know, they're citizens of their community. And often, you know, when we're getting people in crisis, they're shut down because they don't know that they've got anything to offer. They don't believe they have anything to offer. And I think we need to look away from, you know, it's different conversations we need to have with people, you know, and not look at, you know, what's not working. Look at what is working and how we can build on that. You know, I was very fortunate a few years ago to be in a group that had a meal with Cormac Russell, and he always goes on about people coming out of institutions. We closed institutions down and we brought people into communities, but we brought them into communities that they weren't part of building up. So therefore, their community is alien to them, and we need to look at how we can start building these communities to support the people that, you know, that we work with. and help them feel more citizens of their communities. And I think with us being as an independent project, I know that social work, they don't have time on their side, they're time limited. Whereas, we go in and we have that different conversation. And I think you need to shift the power as well. That's another factor, that we go in and we have that completely different conversation at the beginning, that the family that we're going in to see, or the person we're going to see, they're the expert, not us. They know what.
It's an interesting one, Gail, is that whole thing about and that's absolutely things that we've talked about for many years, is about the power shift and the proactiveness and seeing folk not as what they can't do, but what they can do. But interestingly, you're still describing there about you having a different type of conversation to some of the formal assessments. And I guess one of the things we've been pushing for is for that to be the same, throughout, because that's one of the things that upsets and frustrates people, is if you go to one place and you have one type of conversation about what you can't do and what you're not entitled to, and then you go to another part of service land, even though you're trying to get a bit more about what people can do, but there's also elements of signposting them to things that are available. It's quite confusing for people if they don't get the same message, and it would be great if we could get a much more proactive, much more consistent message, because otherwise the people will be less panicky, thinking, I'm not going to get anything, I've got to fight for every scrap of support and stuff, and that just doesn't put people in a good place, does it?
It certainly doesn't, and as I keep saying, it is really difficult, and I think the pandemic has shown that we need to change things. I think we've been saying for a long time that social care needs to change, the way things are being done, and I think the pandemic now is at the point where it's good to sweep the floor clean, and start again, and start looking at what we had before and how we're going to change that going forward. But it is difficult, because things are not consistent across the board, and you can find that even within teams, there's no consistency. That there isn't, it depends. One person could say, one professional could say that, this family is in crisis, but according to another professional, they might think they're not in crisis, and we need to start. And as I said earlier, I think there's a lot of communication. We need to start talking to each other, and we've been in meetings where, health have said, no, that's education, and education have said no, and, somebody else has said that, that's another. And I think, we need to stop blaming, just pull together and start, working together and talking to each other, around how best, not being territorial, let's just focus on the family here, or the person. They're in the centre here, and listen to them and start talking to each other as well. And I think that would join things up a bit more and be a bit more consistent.
Yeah, Gail, can I just ask you, Gail, do you know the support that you provide, is that for everyone in Fife, or is it just for adults, or is it for adults and children together?
Any age, and we also support the family. It's not just the focused person, we'll support the whole family as well. So it could be siblings, and refer them into maybe young carers, and that sort of thing as well. So we look at the whole family and how we can support the whole family. We've been working really closely with our partner, our head office, our partner projects at head office, and they've just started up a new Family Connect, which is national, and it's for any parent of a person that has a learning disability, autism, ADHD, and they have weekly sessions where there's people coming in to talk. We did one on self-directed support. There's our financial guy, at head office, our financial advisor, he's given them some support. We've had support around education, legal stuff on education. There's loads of different stuff, and there's peer support and things as well going forward. you know. So again, it's a good platform for people to come together and share what's working and what's not working, and get a bit of support for that as well. So
okay, so if anybody was interested in finding out more about that, how would they do that, Gail?
They can get in contact with Enable, or go on the website. There's some information there as well. They can get in touch with us, you know, just whatever works for them, depending on what area they're in as well. But it's a national thing. Also on the transition stuff, we're working closely with a colleague from the employability team who's doing a wee bit of the research, because we're finding that transitions are really hard for some young people at the moment. They're being offered the opportunity to go to college, but they're not being offered the wider opportunities like apprenticeships and things that mainstream peers would get. So they're doing a wee bit of research and things just now as well around you know, opening up transitions. When we go to transition, there's not anybody from employment to talk to families or the young person, you know, giving them different opportunities. So there's that new project going on just now as well.
Okay, that's good. And everybody send you the connections in there that have the information. So that's good. Have you got much awareness, or have you had any conversations about the independent review that we just mentioned earlier on, Gail?
I've had a look at it, but I've not had any conversations or anything about it yet.
Yeah. Okay. Could just discuss. Partly, I'm saying that because I know one of the areas that the review specifically wants to consider is about people's involvement, meaningful involvement of people in their assessment and co-design and co-production. So I think there's quite a scope for people to be able to feed their views in really to that review. I think it's really important that as many people as possible have that personal experience, feed their views into that review.
Yeah, I totally agree, because what we find is that some people don't even know that they've had, you know, an assessment carried out, you know, that they've not been part of it. And what we're finding just now is they're not getting to sign a disclaimer now either, you know, to say that they're agreeing with what is in the assessment. So I think it's really good to have those platforms so that people can feed back and give their views as well. It's really important.
That's an interesting one. We have actually been discussing as part of the Social Work Scotland, our kind of discussion about SDS and looking at what would make sense. One of the things we were talking about was kind of this whole idea of almost a live feedback loop. You know how, you know, you kind of buy a sandwich without being asked, you know, how was your service today? Where you know. And yet for some people it's like you say, they might not know if they've had a full an assessment. They might not, nobody's asked them necessarily about which options they did get a chance to choose from and which weren't available in their area, because I know that some areas, rural areas for example, have struggled to get staff that'll meet certain requirements, and it's really hit and miss, isn't it? You talked earlier about how it can be even within teams. So it's not even about what one health and social care partnership has as their standard and their criteria. A lot of it's down to interpretation, and that's it can be really good if you get a really good number of staff, and it can be. It's still awful if you're not getting that, though, aren't you? Yeah, and it's that whole thing about clarity of reasonable expectations for everyone, and that people get to understand that and have that explained, and there's information for that. And then the second thing there that you mentioned that I think that people talk about a lot and always bring up is that whole idea of accountability. Yes,
that there are reasonable expectations, and that if those expectations aren't met, there are simple processes that people are aware about that need to explain why that hasn't been the case. Yeah.
You know, and as you said, you know, there's some, you know, really good social workers out there that, you know, the families are, you know, part of the whole process, you know, or they'll get us involved to go out and discuss, you know, and do a wee bit of prep work around the options and, you know, what the outcomes might look like, doing a wee bit of person-centred planning before it, you know, just so that, you know, the families feel totally involved in it. But I think, you know, it goes back, as I said, you know, to that power shift. You know, we need to have those different conversations with people so that they feel a part of what's going on here. And it's that, do it with them and not do it to people.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Are there any things that you would say you've learned from this last 6 or 7 months that we've had now? What would you say that you now know that you didn't know before the start of the pandemic and all the restrictions?
I suppose there's quite a lot, you know, as I said, technology, obviously, you know, we've got a handle on technology now, which I never ever, you know, way back at the beginning, I never thought we'd be able to interview PAs and get, you know, things set up for people and things that way. But I think it's for our project, it's taken a restock of things, you know, where we're at. And we're very much driven around what people, the service that people are looking for. So I think, you know, being guided around what that might look like going forward, and I think we need to do a wee bit of work there, you know, looking at the community stuff, you know, as part of our remit as well. It's looking at building communities and, you know, getting people feeling part of their community. And I think we need to look at that going forward. You know, there needs to be more of this community-driven work. And supporting people in communities, whatever that might look like, you know, but that's one of the big things that I've taken stock from this, that there needs to be more opportunities for people in communities and you know, use what was there at the beginning, you know, and I feel that's already slipped, you know, that there was emergency funding and communities all came together and things, and we're now going into a second wave of the pandemic, and there doesn't seem to be that same support out there that there was a wee back at the beginning. So, you know, we keep talking about building community resilience, but we're, you know, I feel that's slipping at the moment. So that's one of the big things that I have learned from this.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, you knew that already, didn't you, Gail? Really, but it just reinforces that, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Were you involved? You were involved, weren't you, in the Small Spark stuff as well? That was which was about helping people to get connected. Previously, that's happened in Fife, weren't you?
Yeah. One of my colleagues were involved in that. They were on the panel. The Small Sparks. Yeah. We do. I think for youngsters as well, the ILF Transition Fund is really, really good. You know, that's a good way of connecting people back into their communities as well. You know, at a really important time in their lives. You know, when they're, you know, coming out of school, which is really daunting, not just for the young person, but for the parent as well. So we do a lot of that. So that is a good, you know, example of how community stuff works, you know, and getting people back connected to their community.
I know. Just thinking that at our Feel Good Friday sessions last week, we were talking a little bit more about some of the you know, the informal community connections that folk have got, the things that aren't necessarily down anywhere as a paid support, but that makes such a difference to people's lives. So like Joe, who stays up in Fraserburgh, and he goes in and DJs as part of Buchan Radio every week, and he said that, you know, folk have been really flexible. They've helped. You know, they'll sort out the times to fit him and stuff like that, and it's not a paid service at all. But the issue is that Buchan Radio, because it's I think it's a community interest company, but because a lot of its money, its income was advertising, and nobody's got money to advertise, it's really, you know, it's really at risk. And there's lots of things like that where really good, you know, parts of people's lives that aren't necessarily about formal paid services are just teetering on the brink. And the longer this goes on, the more that we're going to lose of that that community infrastructure if we don't actively maintain it, aren't we, really? And that seems to be, the longer this is going on, the more we've got to kind of shore that up, really put it front and center so we don't take it for granted.
Yeah, definitely. I also want to say, Gail, I just want to say that your service is a service that's based in Fife, isn't it?
Yeah.
But wherever you are in Scotland, there should be an organisation like Fife Auction, which is the Enable service that you work for. But there should be a service that's independent, that is able to provide independent advice and support wherever you are in Scotland, funded by Scottish Government as part of their Support in the Right Direction fund.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had some inquiries that have come into us from out with our geographical area, and what I've done is made the connection in that area with the independent project then, so that they're more, they know how things work in that area, because as you say, it's not consistent in all areas, so they've got a better handle on how things are working. We signpost them onto them.
Yeah, excellent. And I would just say, if anybody is watching today and needs that and can't find the information about their own local organisation, please get in touch, and we'll forward that information to them. We're at 46 minutes already on this broadcast, and we try and keep it around about this time. So we just want to check in with you about any last comments, anything that you'd like to say to leave anyone who's watching today and who'll watch this later on.
Last comments, gosh, I'm not sure. I think, we all just want this pandemic over with, I think that's one of the main things, but I think we need to use this time constructively, going forward, do a bit of planning, whatever that might look like for everybody, but use the services that are still out there, to support around that planning. But I think we need to use this time really constructively and start talking together and, keep that going, keep that momentum going, so that when we get out of the other side of this pandemic, we're in a better position to take things forward.
Okay, thanks, Gail. Alistair, have you final comments today?
Well, no, I suppose just the usual, that we'll be gathering more of those stories at Feel Good Friday about what makes a difference to folks' lives, and trying to share a bit of that so that people do pay a bit more attention to that. But that'll do for me for today.
Okay, yep. So Feel Good Friday at 1 o'clock on Friday.
1 o'clock on Friday.
Anyone who wants to join, who hasn't joined before, get in touch with us. We'll be back on webinar Wednesday again next week at 11 o'clock. And yep. Okay.
And perfect. Okay. And yes, and hopefully next week we're going to be joined by Dates and Mates in Aberdeen. Okay. So, and you've got a shout out from
Gillian, who's in Murray, so we can do that.
Make a connection about that. So cool. Okay. Thanks everybody for watching.
Thank you. Thanks, Gail. Thanks.